SCP-8190 Departmentalized. Corporate life is an unfortunate necessity for many people around the world, and while manual labor jobs have their own hefty share of downsides, the image of white-collar work in the media has never been really glamorous. Films such as Office Space or shows like Severance aren't coy about showcasing the endless repetition and tedium involved with working for a massive corporation, often focusing on the average employee rather than the high-power executives. For workers in many environments like these, it can sometimes be inscrutable as to how much they're really contributing to the organization, and how much organization there is to speak of. SCP-8190 takes this idea to a bit of an extreme, as the Foundation is certainly a somewhat extreme organization, with countless departments, sub-departments, facilities, and employees. While obviously a certain percentage of the Foundation's employees have a decent grasp of what's going on, many are left with their own tasks, in their own sub-department, in their own department, with little clue of the big picture. I should mention that this is another intermission article for the Admonition series, so it gets a bit tricky. Let's take a look. The article begins with a notice from ETRA, the Emergent Threat Tactical Response Authority, stating that this document exists in its unmodified original state as part of an ongoing investigation, and if you'd like to request a copy, please complete Form SR-01 and submit it to Site-19's Department of Notional Divisions. The Containment Director for Site-19, Marissa Norwood, sends in a ticket about the ETRA message, as this is the first time in 20 years that she's ever had to manually submit an access request, let alone in hard copy. Normally, she'd assume L5 classification and forget about it, but there's no listed clearance level for 8190, and she sees no records of an ETRA investigation on her end. She's also pretty sure that she's never heard of a Department of Notional Divisions either. She's submitting the ticket as she's not sure if it's some sort of a bug or if she's just out of the loop, but she'd like a copy of the SR-01 request sheet and the contact info for the current head of Notional Divisions. She guesses that it's some sort of recent internal restructuring, since the Council has been doing a lot of that lately. We're then given only the classification info for 8190, with it having the containment type of Simulacra and the secondary class of Radix. In another ticket, Norwood says that she still hasn't received the SR-01 document and still can't access 8190, although the classification info is seemingly visible to everyone. She wonders why ETRA would lock the contents of the file aside from the classification, and there isn't much to learn from them, with Simulacra not even being listed in the classifications guide. She also complains about the abysmal response times for the ticket, with her first ticket going to be auto-closed without a response in 18 hours. She then sends in a third ticket, now with the severity listed as high, and says that she's heard from a few colleagues with computer troubles that their tickets have been going unanswered for some time now, and Conceptual has been completely without SkipNet access for 2 weeks. She asks if they're just that backlogged or if they're making a point about user error or personal accountability, because people can't Google how to fix their things if their laptops won't connect to the remote network in the first place. She says that this situation is a fiasco, so whatever they're dealing with must be pretty bad to not even acknowledge that they exist. Her original ticket has expired now, and although they probably already knew that, it feels like a good idea to acknowledge it in case anyone comes down on her about how nothing seems to be functioning like it should. In yet another ticket, she says that she went and spoke to Director Rourke about this communication problem, and he told her to keep a timeline of events and to keep submitting tickets as issues develop. She tells them not to worry about SR-01, as it took her some time, but she managed to dig one up from the archive. They haven't needed to use them in 40-odd years, and it even has space for an ink pad stamp. She filled it out, but without knowing where to bring it, it's just going to take up space on her desk, so it would be great if someone from IT could point her in the right direction. Finally, Norwood receives a response from Director Fritz of the Department of Notional Divisions, thanking her for her interest in SCP-8190. They have received the required form, and he thanks her for following standard protocol as described within Foundation guidelines. Her request is currently being processed, and they will contact her when this is no longer the case. Despite this, she sends in another ticket, asking if one of them popped by her office to pick up that SR-01 form. They're the only ones she mentioned notional divisions to, but she just got an email last night saying that they received the form, and now the form is gone from her desk. She knows that it's a step in the right direction, but she just realized that there was no digital copy in the archive, and she couldn't make a photocopy because the printer was down. Basically, she might have just used the last SR-01 in Foundation possession. She then responds to the email from Director Fritz, asking if he's the Director of Notional Divisions, as she can't find them anywhere in their building directory. She saw their entry on the company-wide glossary of departments, but she doesn't really understand what they do exactly. The IT department wasn't any help either, although they haven't been much help at all lately. She would like to update her directories and contact info, as it is required for all departments to do so, including theirs, and it would make it easier to communicate with each other. The response she gets from Fritz thanks her for her patience as they reviewed her documentation. She'll be pleased to hear that her request has been authorized in accordance with Foundation guidelines, and he notes that their department does not choose who is approved or denied, with them only acting as an intermediary. He's attached a photocopy of the approval for her records, and mentions that the document was inadvertently mistaken for refuse, with the misunderstanding having been rectified. He's sorry to hear about her technical difficulties, but he recommends reaching out to technical support, and he'll append their contact info to this email for her use. With that, we're finally given the documentation for SCP-8190, now listed with the object class of Imperative and the hazard level of Irrelevant. The containment procedures mention that Site-19's automated intelligent management system has tasked several departments with investigation into various phenomena related to 8190, including the Department of Notional Divisions, Asset Acquisition and Accountability, Cartography, and Internal Investigations. The Department of Notional Divisions has also assigned itself a top priority directive, identifying and understanding the nature of 8190-Prime. It also includes a chart mentioning a large number of different departments and their current access level to 8190. Most of them now have either limited access or have been recused. The Decommissioning Department access has been decommissioned, and the Department of Deletions from the Black Box admonition article is under investigation. Lastly, the Department of Notional Divisions is listed as having Passepartout access credentials, a French idiom meaning a skeleton key or master key. SCP-8190 is the collective designation for a number of bureaucrato-hazardous effects, potentially impacting all systems of administrative management within Site-19's employee hierarchy and core functions. It appears to correlate directly with certain sections of the Foundation Employee Handbook, 1st edition, from which the rise of related semiohazardous qualities were first noted having spontaneously manifested around Class C personnel and employee of interest, James A. Harkness. One physical copy of the 1st edition handbook still exists, in a locked glass display case in the Site-19 atrium, featuring a commemorative plaque celebrating the Foundation's progress as an organization dedicated to the maintenance of the Veil. At the time of the handbook's printing, The Foundation was about 0.4% of its current size, with employees stationed at less than 20 secure facilities worldwide. Following the development of novel detection systems for anomalous phenomena, the remaining handbook was analyzed, revealing larger than average Akiva radiation emissions. No other anomalous properties have been detected, and the Akiva radiation levels have not changed since the original measurement. Although Foundation records indicate that Harkness was employed by the organization for almost 3 decades, mostly in network security and other infotech-related departments, specific details regarding his employment history are missing from the database. Harkness is notable for having an especially high cognitive resistance threshold, making him resistant or immune to many cognitohazardous anomalies, and has served brief stints as interim staff because of it. The discrepancy in his employment history was not detected until after his recovery, which prompted an internal investigation into the AIMS consensus system that was ultimately futile. The AIMS system is used to prevent data loss and manipulation by forcing revisions to archives that do not match the rest of the network. Recovered materials and post-action interviews with Harkness imply that 8190 primarily impacts the original code of employee conduct, though more recent evidence suggests that the entirety of the guidebook may be susceptible. Affected individuals are unable to deviate from the guidelines discussed in relevant sections, and will experience retroactive changes in reality to ensure that this is the case. In the rare event that such retroactive changes are not possible, affected employees will vanish, and a facsimile construct will fill the role of the lost employee shortly after. These constructs are capable of emulating human behavior and completing most duties required. Other impacted statements or sentiments include the necessity of coffee in the break room, certain members of the administration being unable to close the doors to their office, and the spontaneous appearance of employee group photos despite none being taken. So basically, it's an anomaly affecting a number of Foundation employees, causing them to adhere to the employee guidelines from the original Foundation handbook. It's even capable of warping reality to ensure that they adhere to the guidelines, and if it's impossible to warp reality to make it happen, it simply vanishes the person and replaces it with a construct that looks like them and follows the rules. It makes sense then that it would have been very hard for the Foundation to detect that any anomaly was even occurring, as it just seemed like everyone was simply following the proper rules and protocol. This changed with Harkness, and we'll see why soon, but it certainly has something to do with his cognitive resistance value. We're then given an excerpt from the handbook, an introduction to the basics of being a Foundation employee. It reads, "On your first day as Foundation personnel, it's important that you familiarize yourself with the way our organization is, well, organized. Everything from contacting your supervisor to ordering tests, performing said tests, and disposing of waste materials, they all have procedures to follow. Not only that, but they all have hard-working people, just like yourself, behind the scenes. It is integral that we all do our part, and that includes knowing when to pass the baton on to the next person. This keeps your secure site moving smoothly, like a well-oiled machine. The Foundation employee axioms are an effective means to remind everyone of the roles they play in our workplace, with hope that the Founder's guiding light shines through us, even in the dark. All employees have purpose. They are the foundation of the Foundation. All employees report from an assigned secure facility. Each secure facility has a site director. Each department has a director of operations. Every on-site employee is assigned a department. Every employee has a voice and a right to be heard. Every employee does their part, allowing others to do the same. Employees will behave in a manner becoming of them or they will be replaced. Now, you might be thinking, this is great, but how do I clock out for lunch? Luckily, we're covering our punch clock system in the next section. At the bottom of the excerpt is a section with a cute cartoon version of the Foundation logo, and text telling the reader to look for Sammy Skipper to find helpful tips and information throughout this book, as Sammy knows more than you might think. The breadth of 8190's effect, the status of Harkness, and subsequently any other hypothetically affected employees were ultimately lost for an indeterminate amount of time. Harkness was discovered accidentally, found working within 8190-A some 14 years after the last time his ID badge had been used. He has not outwardly aged during his time inside of the anomaly, which was discovered by Notional Division's agents during a routine structural analysis of Site-19. 8190-A is an extra-dimensional space resembling a rectangular borehole located beneath the substructure of Site-19, and accessible only when passing through the floor of the Site-19 atrium and adjacent rooms, leading to a sheer drop with bare concrete walls, roughly 150 meters in depth. A nondescript staircase then can be found along the outer perimeter, with each landing containing an identical corner office along its descent. This office is designated the Department of Redundancy Department, and at the time of discovery, Harkness was observed staffing the office on all floors. Upon entering the offices, personnel discovered him filing paperwork in an identical fashion at each landing, and despite the conditions, he appeared disinterested and preoccupied, unable to respond or otherwise react to the presence of others. He continued receiving, signing, stamping, and depositing documents, which arrived via a pneumatic tube aside his desk, and continued downward through the floor. As personnel descended further down the staircase, the offices were seen growing more recursive, leading to increased travel times, odd variations in layout, and redundant repetition of phrases, notably the repeated use of the phrase Department of Redundancy Department, Recursive Division. Upon reaching the bottom, personnel discovered a tessellation of the previously described office, staffed by many copies of Harkness, all of whom were working on large volumes of similar paperwork in a persistent loop. As the staircase continued downward, despite reaching the bottom, the matter of the space became metastable, unable to retain its form as it shifted between a variety of objects and structures upon contact. Personnel were not able to safely proceed further into the anomaly at this point, and were recalled. Further attempts to communicate with Harkness or request an extraction team have not been attempted, and it's unknown which Harkness is the original, or if an original exists at all. Members of the Department of Notional Divisions are, however, able to observe the infinite recurrence of Harkness, and the infinite confluence of paperwork he provides. A hatch is to be installed in Janitorial Supply Room 03A, disguised as a sewer maintenance access panel, in the event further communications or interventions prove necessary. This is followed by an update informing us that upon Harkness's escape from 8190-A and the Foundation's acquisition of him, the space has remained otherwise inactive. Each office has been abandoned, and the space itself possesses no further recursive phenomena. Harkness is to undergo rigorous interrogative services to determine the extent of his knowledge of 8190's properties. With that, we have the first interview between Harkness and Director Quaid of the Department of Notional Divisions. Harkness is seated in a briefing area on the 8th floor of Site-19, with an overfilled manila folder in front of him, which he averts his eyes from, being visibly uncomfortable. Quaid proceeds to flip through the documents in the folder, stating that He sure looks alright for someone who hasn't eaten in nearly 15 years, but Harkness continues to say nothing. Quaid says that they should focus on getting him back to where he belongs, and Harkness finally speaks, asking if he can go back to testing kill hazards on himself, as that was more his speed. Quaid assumes that that's some sort of offbeat joke, and says it's one or the other, back in the borehole or back in a cubicle. Harkness sighs and pauses, saying that he's thinking. Quaid asks what is there to think about. He was good at the jobs he had, at least most of them, so they should be able to find something related to his strengths. The need for personnel in many positions adjacent to his degree has decreased dramatically since the migration to Ames, and he's not sure how he feels about putting him back into conceptual studies, as he heard that Harkness dissolved a person. Harkness argues that that was an accident. Quaid then mentions that Harkness claims to have been briefly involved in the Metaphysical Sciences Department as a liaison for the Narrativistics Division. Harkness says that he held a seminar a ways back about it, but he's pretty sure that he just confused them both if he elaborated, so he instead just insists that Quaid ask his author. This evokes no response from Quaid, and Harkness begins looking around the room, briefly disoriented, having heard his voice speaking without command of his mouth. Quaid replies that he's never heard of narrativistics, and he can't send him to metaphysical if he has no relevant experience. Harkness says that that's a shame, and maybe they just try again tomorrow, but Quaid asks where exactly he'll be spending the evening. Employee guidelines state that he must be on assignment to receive housing accommodations, so it seems to him that the best course of action is to return him to one of his older positions with the Foundation. He could resume his clerical duties as grant requisitions clerk for the Department of Macro Engineering and Design, but Harkness says that he has no idea what that is and doesn't think that's a real department name. He was a network systems engineer in the IT department, and he can't imagine that any of his old jobs are just waiting for him if the only one they can find is one he never had. Quaid just smiles and closes the folder, saying that that's very perceptive and prudent of him to point out such a discrepancy. He hands Harkness a business card and asks him if he knows what he does for a living. Harkness says that he works for money, and that he's a departmental director, so he directs the Department of Notational Divisions, misreading the business card. Quaid corrects him, saying that the Department of Notional Divisions is involved in biology, not math. In a complex ecological system, survival of the fittest is rule 0 of natural order. Humans were eaten until they ate. They beat and killed one another for a parcel of verdant paradise, or the minerals beneath their feet. It's about territory, resources, security, and competition, with the same behavior applying to a herd, or a community, or even a workplace. Mother Nature doesn't play fair, and hardly ever do two groups start on equal playing fields. Most are stuck in the situations they've been given, but there are a few imitators that adapt to their environment, move undetected within it, and learn to play the game well enough to skim off the backs of bigger business. They are the apex predators of corporate espionage. Harkness guesses then that the Department of Notional Divisions finds these imitators and shuts them down, or reports them to the administration. Quaid replies that they have different procedures for different situations, but nothing he'd be too unfamiliar with. Harkness then asks about the Department of Redundancy Department, whose motto is the foundation of the Foundation. He knows for a fact that Notional Divisions visited, took measurements, and left. He kept thinking that they'd come back, but then 10 years passed and he convinced himself that the only one who cared enough to get him out of there was himself. Quaid says that he understands his frustration, as the organization has many legitimate departments possessing esoteric origins and inexplicable duties. They have to adhere to the same guidance as everyone else, and that means following the order of operations. They can't just boot every weird department they come across. Harkness asks why they didn't try and get him out of that hole, or at least tell someone, to which Quaid just chalks it up to bureaucracy. He wants to get back to the topic, though, of offering Harkness a new role, one he thinks he'll be able to complete the functions of easily, as it aligns well with some of his more recent experience. He'd be sitting at his own desk, reading dossiers on departments, and flagging any that seem suspicious. He can send them off for review, internal investigation, or for dismantlement, and can take lunch and breaks at his own time, as long as it rests within the boundaries of the rules. There's even a completion bonus for each file he wraps without error. Harkness pauses, narrowing his eyes, and asks if he says yes, will he still be able to leave the building? Quaid replies that of course he would, and he's able to now, but per his onboarding contracts, he is restricted to specific radii outside of this and other relevant buildings for the duration of employment, and it's also currently mid-snowstorm. Additionally, he has outstanding responsibilities here, and Quaid extends his hand, which Harkness hesitantly shakes. Quaid stands and wipes his palm on his pants, stating that they'll head to his new office, which he's sure is more comfortable than his last one. Harkness corrects him to say his second to last office, as he's not sure how he'd define his last workspace in a department which has been redacted. Quaid asks him who he's talking about, to which he repeats the name of the department and says that they helped him out of redundancy. Quaid sighs and says that that department is not real. Harkness pauses, then swears and says that he thought the name sounded a bit out there. Quaid assures him that he'll pick up on it. We're then given another excerpt from the handbook, this time titled Information Security and You, Clearance Levels. It mentions that you may have noticed brightly colored numbers located outside containment chambers throughout your orientation tour, and if not, keep in mind that if you typically wear prescription glasses, it is required to do so while on site or working in the field. If you believe that you may need corrective eyewear, you should take advantage of the Foundation's robust vision insurance plans, and their newest facility, Site 19, even has an on-site optometrist. It's noted that this optometry program was discontinued 3 months after the handbook's printing, and the word robust was removed from the reference to the Foundation's vision insurance plans in subsequent printings, as it was considered inappropriate. It continues by saying that it's important to keep those numbers visible and well understood prior to entering any containment area, as those numbers represent clearance levels, and everyone has one. It then goes into the various clearance levels and who has access to them. Clearance level 0 is for any declassified documents which may be disseminated to the public, which, as of the first edition's printing, had never been done and they don't plan to. Clearance level 1 is for all Foundation personnel except for D-Class. Clearance level 2 is for the majority of personnel upon request using Form SR01, or if assigned to a relevant project. Clearance level 3 requests site admin approval or higher. Level 4 is for site admins or higher only. Level 5 is for the highest members of administration, such as the council, the administrator, and the founder. And finally, level 6 states that if you see this clearance number in your facility, contact your supervisor immediately and evacuate the area until an all clear has been given. The Sammy Skipper section at the bottom reads, "See something you shouldn't have? Idea won't leave your mind? Our memory management specialists work tirelessly to invent, discover, and perfect non-invasive, non-lethal procedures to help. Thanks to recent advances in amnestic research, save the stress of burdensome knowledge. Unsure of what is hazardous/restricted? No problem. Visit a Foundation medbay and have our trained clinicians take a look for you. So we know that 8190-A is the odd structure underneath Site-19, but 8190-B is a collection of anomalous PA system announcements heard throughout Site-19. It's noted that the facility has not required use of an address system since 1989, and thus does not currently possess one. Analysis suggests the announcements are of similar fidelity to others made on the pre-existing system, though with significant ontological distortion. Further investigation revealed that the voice of the individual heard speaking during these announcements matches that of Harkness in all but one instance. We're given transcripts for a handful of announcements made between March 2026 and November 2029. In the first, Harkness is heard testing the microphone and tapping on it, before speaking off the microphone and saying that he doesn't think he's getting through. In the second, he says that he doesn't know if or how this is going to work, but they told him to keep trying. They said that it was his right to keep trying, and to keep it by the book, the good book. He says that he's never read it, despite them telling him that he has, but he misplaced his copy. He remarks that hell is a construct built on Bibles, after all, before being cut off. In the third one, he swears and says that they told him to keep his finger on the button. He asks how much time he lost, before telling himself to keep it together. They also told him to breathe, and he repeats a mantra they told him, that he's on a ship, sailing down a river, but the water is time, and the river is an ocean. Focus on the ties that bind us. He then says that if anyone can hear him, his name is James Anselm Harkness, and he is, or was, or will be, a network engineer for Site-19. He then wonders if there's a tense besides past, present, and future, before swearing and the announcement ends. In the next one, he asks if anyone understands what he's trying to say. It's been getting harder and harder to stay on track ever since the redacted department muddled with his head. He then says, however, that he agreed to this, as that's the function and the forms right there, and he signed them himself. He then asks why he would sign off on a form letting them meddle with his head. It's clear that he's quite confused, but he says that they tried to stop him, and he fell beneath the floor. He then says that there's something else down here in the mud with him, but it's not here. Not yet. The tense is all crooked, and everything else is down here too, but it's facing the wrong way. The other wrong way. Some muffled voices are heard, and he says that he should go, back down beneath the floor, into the mud. He then asks why won't anyone do anything, as he's right here. The last announcement consists of him singing a song about falling beneath the floor and how he'll never get out. He's employee of the month forever, and he's on the clock until the end of time itself. After that, none of this will matter anymore, and they should wait until they see who they've been working for. A security investigation into the broadcasts ultimately led to the discovery of a hatch within Janitorial Supply Room 03A. A brief period of administrative leave was granted to Harkness, allowing him temporary passage out of the anomaly, with acquisition by the Department of Notional Divisions following soon after. In another interview between Harkness and Quaid, Harkness is seen sitting at a desk, scanning over the contents of a folder with a concerned look on his face as Quaid enters. He asks him how he's liking his new assignment in office, with Harkness replying that he's not really sure if this counts as an office, but he asks if he can draw a bit while they're talking. His hands were constantly in motion as a redundancy agent, so he's still adjusting, and it's hard to focus on anything if he's not keeping the digits busy. Quaid finds him some paper and a pen and hands them to Harkness, who begins idly drawing random patterns as they continue. He says that he read the materials Quaid gave him and looked over his previous determinations, but he still doesn't think he's identifying them well in praxis. He holds up a folder about the Ethics Committee and then an empty folder about the Anti-Memetics Division, and says that he can't possibly determine if departments like these are real or manufactured. He has no idea what they do, and he doesn't even know if they exist in the first place. Quaid tells him that he of all people should know that impossible things happen frequently in their line of work, and sometimes it's best to simply go with your gut. Harkness disagrees, however, and says that these are people's jobs at risk, so he can't go with his gut using the amount of information he's given for some of these. The debrief he was given about the Department of Unreality was a 6-hour video of an empty lecture hall. At 3 hours and 47 minutes in, he thinks he heard someone cough, but the silence and lack of clarity made him reflect a bit though. He realized that he has no idea what he's doing here, and knows absolutely nothing about this department. Prior to being in redundancy and seeing them in the corner of his eye, he had never known of notional divisions. He asks how many people are in the department, and how many are constructs. Quaid says that it's natural to have these questions and thoughts, but not a single person in the history of notional divisions could say for sure. They're dealing with extremely powerful retrocausal properties, and although they have been studying the anomaly for some time now, they have little to show for it. Constructs are functionally identical to their human coworkers, and they have exhausted nearly all possible avenues in attempting to distinguish the two apart. He does have a theory about Harkness, though, that he might be one of the only Foundation employees capable of completing this task, or maybe the only one. Harkness laughs incredulously, but Quaid says that his resistance to anomalous influence may help him perceive minute differences in the two, as a gut feeling. He has his most recent performance data right here, and he opens it, stating that he has yet to mistakenly file one department. So even if he's feeling insecure about his current state of affairs, the data doesn't support that conclusion. If he does need some constructive feedback, his overall rap time could use improvement, but they can just chalk that up to self-doubt. He then asks if those doubts have something to do with his experience downstairs, and asks if he wants to talk about it, perhaps about his previous position with the redacted department. He asks how they freed him from the hole, and Harkness explains that they came upstairs to meet him, and they were way weirder than he is, which he found notable. Everything strange is notable when you've been doing paperwork for 5,000 days straight, but these guys were impossible. It really freaked him out when they started showing up in his periphery, and then they walked up to him and waved. He thinks that they weren't sure if he was aware at all, and they visited a couple times before deciding that he was. He would have given a kidney to hear someone's boots stomping around upstairs, shaking dust into his eyes, but instead he was given nothing for years. He was exiled, and he should be dead, but he's not, and it still somehow feels like pulling the short straw. Quaid says that there are always multiple perspectives when surviving such adversity for as long as he did, and coming out as intact as he is, and asks if that means anything to him. Harkness gives a thumbs up and says sure, and explains that he got out by transferring departments. Something obviously wanted him back in there though, so it's a good thing he can be so stubborn. Quaid then asks how he made his way from redundancy to the PA system after breaking free of the loop. Harkness remarks that they could hear him then, and sighs. One of his rescuers had a fair bit of memory of his past life, and claimed to have worked on the AV setup of Site-19, including running cables for the announcement system. He thought he might know where parts of it were, and guessed that they'd still be functional. Obviously, they still were, and the controls still existed meta-conceptually, abstracted under eroding currents of temporal soup, broken into conceptual building blocks, abstracted further down, landing in the meta-conceptual plane of comprehending concepts themselves. The concept of interaction, the concept of context, the concept of roles, the concept of pressing finger to button, which is impossible to interact with if you don't understand what role you play in that transaction. Are you finger or button? And it turns out that you're not quite either, but definitely more one than the other. He got it figured out eventually, though, and Quaid asks him if this was what he wanted. Harkness says that he wanted out, and to not be existentially traumatized by his occupation. They wanted him out too, as they saw time differently, and for a minute, on some unknown fraction of physical time-space, he saw it. They were afraid. Quaid asks what they were afraid of, and if they told him, to which Harkness just stays silent, staring at Quaid with a look of amusement on his face. He then says that he finally has a confident read on Quaid, between his body language, his false praise, and the way he talks with his probing questions. He's got construct written all over him. Quaid asks why he would think that, to which Harkness says that he can see constructs easily, just like Quaid told him, and says that maybe his metrics will jog his memory. He proceeds to grab the folder off of the desk and dump the contents out, showing all of the pages to be blank. After a pause, Quaid tells him that he really shouldn't have done that. We're then given another transcript of a PA announcement, but this time from an unknown voice. He says that this is a message from your friendly neighborhood redacted department. The beholder's eye is one of many, but watch out for the big guy in the center. He apologizes for Harkness, saying that they did their best, but they didn't know what would happen. A strange reverberation rings out and grows in volume, distorting the broadcast. He then says that it knew what would happen. It knows now. It always did, and it's here. The Bureaumancer arrives, the beholder's eye. Time is an ocean, and they should brace themselves. Noise rapidly overwhelms the transmission, ceasing a few seconds later. Next is another excerpt from the employee handbook, this time about navigating the facilities. Finding your way around your assigned facility can seem like a daunting task at first, but not only will you receive a detailed itinerary for your daily activities, which includes step-by-step directions, you'll also find the paths themselves are color-coded for your convenience. Green zones are safe for passage by all personnel. Blue zones pass through non-hazardous containment areas. Yellow zones pass through potentially hazardous containment areas. Orange through confirmed hazardous containment areas, and red zones pass through extremely hazardous containment areas. Lastly, black zones are restricted to essential personnel on a need-to-know basis. Sammy Skipper then says that if you're lost, don't panic. Simply check the site map and retrace your steps until you see a recognizable feature. Doing so has an 8% chance of reorienting lost personnel. If you're part of the 92%, don't worry. Simply proceed to your next station and alert a superior. It's that easy. SCP-8190-C is the collective designation given to an indeterminate number of anomalous structures associated with 8190-derived phenomena, defined as a clandestine, secure facility designated Site-19. While at least one Site-19 has a traceable timeline of construction and use, most facilities of this name encountered have manifested as an extension of 8190's effect. Though each instance is unique, 8190-C always takes the form of a sprawling complex built primarily out of concrete in brutalist architecture. Some idiosyncrasies are also common, typically in the form of excessive repetition of space or disparate mismatching of features created without apparent cause. Though unconfirmed, it's hypothesized that all 8190-C instances are connected to one another, most often through extensive networks of maintenance tunnels, sub-basement areas, and ventilation shafts. Connecting infrastructure has been shown to generate in straight lines between facilities when feasible, making identification of these passageways possible to the trained eye, though not immediately obvious. Care must be taken to ensure proper orientation of one's surroundings. To date, over 64 confirmed instances have been identified, each of which possesses its own employee roster and extensive SCP object inventory. These identified complexes appear to form a network of Foundation infrastructure in an intelligent pattern, resembling an incomplete sigil or thaumaturgic seal, which spans roughly 28% of the Earth's surface. The network is subject to steady, ongoing path of least resistance construction behavior comparable to single-celled eukaryotes, such as slime molds. The Department of Cartography is currently assigned the task of mapping and exploring instances of 8190-C for any unusual phenomena. To date, nothing of note has been recorded, as all facilities are fully operational and vital to the containment of several anomalies. Because of this, the Department of Notional Divisions has integrated SCP-8190 related phenomena into the Foundation's overall containment structure. The next excerpt from the Foundation Employee Handbook is where it starts to get pretty weird, with a section on theological guidelines which was removed from future editions. The excerpt reads, "When the Founder birthed our fair organization as a concept, tilled from the soil of ideas within his mind, there was a great and momentous sound from skies above. A thunderous force fell forth and visited, thanking him for the glory of containment. It is said that this force invigorated and guided him to create the bedrock on which we now owe our great normalcy, and since that moment, the Founder's guiding light lives through us all. This unseen force was Control Manifest, a great being made in service of humanity. The Founder took the being's hand, and with it they made endless strides in favor of the Veil. Upon his death, the Founder spoke to his closest advisors that one day he shall walk the earth anew, emerging from the sea on the back of that great power once more. We wait for this day, for containment to take form. It is what divined the great bureaumancy. It manages your facility, your department, even your thoughts right now, so you can be free of such burdens. Isn't that wonderful?" Sammy Skipper then says to stop looking for it. It brought you into this world and is more than capable of rescinding that privilege. SCP-8190-D refers to the Site-19 Department of Notional Divisions, which does not appear in Foundation records prior to 2015, nor does it have a known base of operations, instead opting to reserve conference rooms and other shared spaces for meeting and executing functions related to its intended purpose. Operatives employed by the Department of Notional Divisions comprise a mixture of actual employees and physical constructs, though entities which manifest within 8190-D's presence are perfectly capable of imitating human behavior. The department's primary mission, according to its own records, is the discovery, triangulation, and supposed detainment of anomalous or otherwise parasitic SCP Foundation divisions and departments. The extent of their operations and the veracity of statements made by them in relation to said operations are not currently known. Their primary mission, according to their own actions, however, is the identification of 8190-Prime, the deity believed to be responsible for the creation of 8190 and therefore of 8190-D itself. Unfortunately, the rest of this description has been redacted, but it should be noted that overall workplace efficiency has been on the rise in Site-19, reaching and maintaining an all-time high as of 2020. We then go back to the interview between Harkness and Quaid, in which Harkness asks what happens now. Quaid stares at him with an unreadable expression, before saying that that's up to him. If he apologizes, earnestly, he won't write him up, and they can consider it just between them. An outburst caused by stressors from his previous situation and his struggle to reintegrate back into Foundation living. It's more than enough of a reason to explain it away. Harkness asks why the papers were all blank though, and where his metrics are. Quaid replies that placebo is very powerful, and his work will be more difficult now that he has disillusioned himself. Empty praise does not mean empty purpose. Harkness then asks how many departments did he get wrong, but Quaid just sighs and says that it's not that simple. All departments were manufactured at some point, as the Foundation wasn't formed with divisions and black sites. They popped up later, when the time was right. Imitators and competition are only part of the picture. Harkness may know that departments spontaneously manifest as part of 8190's effect, but he doesn't know that the effect is intelligent and deliberate. Harkness doesn't see how that's possible, but Quaid explains that departments manifest as they're needed, and where there is demand, supply is not far behind. It starts with competition, but it ends with progress. An ideal foundation exists at the end of this road, and they can thank the good book and its corporate divinity for that. Harkness remarks that he doesn't strike him as religious, but Quaid says that it's hard not to be in his position. They were molded with purpose, placed into this very facility with a drive to discern real from molded, which is an impossible task. The lesson is in their very existence, to discern their creator and to understand why. He has memories of a life he didn't have, and they're as real to him as anything else, but he knows that it's manufactured. He only knows this because of his position within notional divisions, but he asks Harkness how certain he is of his own internal narrative. Harkness sighs and says not very, but he doesn't ascribe that to the bureaucratic equivalent of last Thursdayism. The idea that the world was created last Thursday, and all of our memories from before then were planted. Quaid says that it's more like last Thursdayism with a bounded, recurrent time frame, and asks if he's aware of the concept of Poincaré recurrence, a theorem that certain dynamic systems will, after a long enough time, return to a state close to or exactly the same as their initial state. Quaid says that they'll just have to wait and see if Harkness is still here in the next one. Construct or not, he's failed to keep multiple positions within the Foundation, despite being given opportunity after opportunity. Unfortunately, the Foundation doesn't just let people go, especially insubordinates who have been replacing legitimate departments with frauds. It's a shame that he was so disillusioned by his time in the hole that he started undermining his employers as revenge. Luckily, Quaid was here to stop him before he could cause even more damage, but who's to say how much he's already done? Harkness realizes that they set him up, and swears at Quaid, who replies that it's a bit deserved, as he was offered purpose and turned it down multiple times. He should be thanking him for the opportunity. He already knows what happens to employees without purpose, as purpose is created for them. But what does he think happens to employees who reject purpose? Harkness doesn't know, and Quaid leans in, smiling, stating that they are replaced. The room then shakes, and the overhead lighting flickers briefly as Harkness asks what that was. Quaid tells him that that is the sound of bureaumancy knocking at the door, and reality making way for something far more powerful than itself. Harkness yells that he tried his best here, and he lied to his face about his accuracy, stating that it's Quaid's fault. He then grabs another piece of paper off the table and scratches into it with his pen, as a messy stack of scribbles sits beside him, all looking vaguely alike. Quaid admits that he's right, but he hasn't been completely honest with him. Notional Divisions has a secondary objective, or rather a secret primary objective that Harkness has been carrying out for them. If it wasn't for Ames taking over his duties, he wouldn't have been transferred to redundancy, which wouldn't have put him directly in their crosshairs. The book had willed it, as it is the Foundation's godhead, bound in hard copy. Harkness begins to understand that the book he keeps mentioning is that ancient employee manual he passes by every morning now. That's the source of all this. But Quaid tells him not to jump to any conclusions. More than the book, it's the entire Foundation. They have become larger than life, and their physical bounds can no longer contain the metaphysical or conceptual idea of what they represent. The constructs are intrinsically connected to 8190, and Harkness is like them in that regard. Harkness counters that he's not a construct, but Quaid asks how would he know? His memories of the borehole sound a tad fantastical, as Quaid has seen plenty of Site-19s, and none of them had a borehole. He would have barely believed that he had help from the redacted department if it weren't for the fact that he heard their demiurge erase them from existence right after they spoke Harkness's name. The room then sways, and Harkness's stomach turns, as Quaid tells him to sit back and relax, as that same fate is approaching. This is the end of the line, whether he's construct or human, with real memories or fake. Harkness says in response that they're real, and as for how he knows, he has a memory of this, as he slides over the image that he was drawing. When Quaid looks at it, his body begins to stiffen, his eyes shake rapidly, and blood begins to seep from between his clenched teeth and his nose. He then falls to the ground and begins convulsing as Harkness stands over him. He tells Quaid that he had said he's tested kill agents on himself, and he thinks this one isn't lethal. Hopefully his memory is accurate. He then tells him that he's going to put a stop to this, before grabbing the image off the desk and running out of the room. He sprints down a familiar corridor, only to find it looping back around to where he just was, but retracing his steps only just brings him to a dead end. It seems that Site-19 won't make it easy for him. He hears an unknown voice echoing from behind him, telling him to stop, but he ignores it and continues down the path he originally traveled, finding it branching off at a T-junction instead of looping back again. He takes a left, but stops abruptly as two individuals guard the path ahead. A simple flash of the paper in hand frees open the passage, though the march of more footsteps inbound echo from the endless connecting pathways of Site-19. Coordinated, wordless drones with one thought on their mind: survival. Protecting their parcel of verdant paradise at all costs. And really, who is he to take that away from them? He accepted the offer from Notional Divisions, knowing full well what it entailed. Was he truly so full of himself to think he could place value on a person's occupation, simply because it kept them busy more than it provided profits or results? Is there not value in keeping busy? Harkness thought about these moral quandaries while running, wishing he had formed an opinion on them sooner. Even now, he was unsure. Hands tug at the back of Harkness's shirt, but he manages to shrug them off, taking a sharp turn into a four-way intersection that throws off his pursuers for a few vital moments. He doesn't spend the time catching his breath, however, instead diverting course to stop in one of the many uninspired break rooms within Site-19. grabbing a campfire lighter used to ignite a perpetually grimy range next to an equally grimy microwave. Yelling from outside the room causes his heart to skip a beat. Fortunately, Harkness's doodle proves offensive enough to invoke the intended reaction once or twice more, until the paper is roughly swiped out of his hand, tearing in the process. The man runs back into the hall and towards the massive central atrium he had passed through so many times before. Just below the surface is the very same borehole he would find himself stuck within for nearly 15 years. Harkness runs up to the glass display case, nearly tackled by a mob of personnel screaming threats and pleas for their lives. Ignoring this, he kicks the glass inward and retrieves a gray, faded manuscript. It's warm to the touch, even before the attempted arson. An elbow collides with Harkness's head, and his vision erupts in stars and scotomas, though he refuses to relinquish the object, even as consciousness nearly slips from his body. Flicking at the lighter in his hand, Harkness begs audibly for it to serve its intended purpose, mind no longer considering the moral implications of his actions and now focused purely on his own survival. Forces pull and push at the man from all angles, human and construct, both or neither. Just as Harkness began to bleed, textures collide to create sparks and heat. Aerosolized fuel becomes sustained flame. Touched to paper results in the burning of scripture. A false prophecy of labor for a new world, reduced to ashes. Such is life. The surroundings began to blur, becoming metastable. Feeling the ground shift from tile to carpet to corrugated steel, Harkness squeezes his eyelids shut, burying his head in his arms, and waits for something to happen or for him to die. A moment later, the entire facility implodes. Suddenly, everything is quiet. There are no sounds of commotion, no angry yells or pleas, even the persistent buzz of overhead lighting and ventilation ducts vanishing without a trace. The only audible noise left is a lone, howling wind. Harkness looks up from the pitch blackness of pressing eyes against forearms to a blinding ball of burning plasma in the sky. He's lying prone in a dusty patch of dry sand, the hot air and direct sunlight finally registering as oppressive against his skin. He sits up and looks around, blinking, eyes still not yet fully adjusted to the change in scenery, quickly realizing he has zero idea where he is. No vehicles or buildings in sight, no identifying features at all, aside from an unpaved, winding road leading away from where Harkness finds himself and off into the scintillating horizon. The man groans, righting himself, reluctantly fighting against the force of gravity, and winning, this time. Starting down the pathway, Harkness tries not to think about the last 15 years. Did it even matter? To him, the answer would hinge on perceiving the differences between two indistinguishable experiences. If he couldn't tell, then there is no point in wondering. Minutes later, Harkness's slow pilgrimage into the unknown is interrupted by the sound of an engine. He cranes his neck, looking up and around, desperate to locate the source of the noise. A few moments pass, and a black vehicle emerges into view, windows tinted a dark shade of impenetrable. It rolls up smoothly beside the disheveled man, doors opening without a sound as security personnel emerge, equally silent, indicating to him that this is indeed his ride, and is also not an optional one. Harkness slinks into the cool vehicle and presses up against the leather, which sticks unpleasantly to his skin. The ride is long, and with no frame of reference other than the setting sun, Harkness drifts off for a bit in the back of the car. An instant later, he wakes to a familiar-looking gray building, perhaps his own Site-19, or one of many he may have occupied long ago. This is all but confirmed when after passing a curious glass display case in the vast atrium of the complex, Harkness finds himself at his old desk in the IT department, now branded the Department of Technical Support. The dust had grown considerably in the time since, but it mattered little. He is real. He helps people for a living, even if it often boils down to troubleshooting wireless keyboards and unplugging before plugging in again. A young man approaches Harkness's desk, as he had been doing for others in the office. Rather timidly, he asks the older of the two for a choice of coffee. This was the entirety of the intern's job, asking for and retrieving drink orders served up in the room next door. Harkness couldn't help but laugh, placing his head in his hands. He orders a latte. We're given one last excerpt from the handbook, although the book's title is now redacted as well, and the excerpt is titled Foundations in the Art of Anomalous Warfare. Step 1 is to separate, weakening your enemy by cutting off networks of trusted contacts and any means of communication, both internal and external, up to and including dissolving awareness of each other's existence. Force them to be helpless, and they will choose helplessness whenever possible. Step 2 is to confuse, disorienting your enemy and making them vulnerable through information warfare. Use conflicting accusations, unattainable goals, rumors of moles or false intel suggesting coordinated attacks from one or more adversarial groups. Lastly, step 3 is to precipitate, tipping the scales through stochastic internal crises resulting from a culmination of pressure and distrust. The organization will inevitably and mortally wound itself. With no other recourse, incursion and assimilation will follow easily, with most willingly accepting this fate. It's noted to always leave one alive to warn the others. A very corrupted-looking version of Sammy Skipper says that this is only the beginning. It was indeed only the beginning. In fact, the universe was home to many. In the first beginning, there was only void. A screaming, infinite, godless void. A vast darkness upon the face of the deep. No one spoke, "Let there be light," because no one was. The darkness was empty, and it remained this way for eons. Nature abhors a vacuum, however, and thus, after some time, that peaceful nothingness betided true chaos, a swirling farrago of blight known as everything. Just as nature abhors vacuum, it abhors chaos. Nature abhors. This is all one can say for sure. Eventually, chaos gave way to order. Order lost its grasp, and chaos reigned once more. This war was the first of many. Structures assembled and aligned before being forcefully broken down, reduced to their smallest possible components, then reassembled and realigned again, countless times. And yet, if you were alive to see it, it would have felt like a moment's passing. Not many were around during those early days. The universe was, for all its action and reaction, devoid of life in actuality. Humans, ever the chosen children, believed this fact made them special. A fault in intelligent design, perhaps, which spoke volumes on the nature of how intelligent that design could be. Man would try unsuccessfully to rid the universe of chaos. Man would also try to rid the universe of order. Ultimately, they were more effective at ridding the universe of themselves, however. Their failure would be observed throughout millennia. It would be simulated, analyzed, compared. Humanity would create many branches in the tree of time. Those branches would be noted when they were notable. Many would cease to exist far before they could be considered as such. This is, and always has been, considered the state of affairs. Yet for those few that fit the criteria, their events would be painstakingly recorded, backtracked from frayed ends by a great many eyes at the end of time. The Bureaumancer. Eyes which double as thin probes, a legion of fingers. It sends a command through these conduits, and worlds bend to a single word: submit. Narratives distort and refocus, minds manifest and disappear, ideas emerge, whole plot lines erase. It utters again: collapse. Loose ends cauterize at the sight of amputation. Old pathways are rewritten by emergent rules defining the boundaries of what remains. A final command rings out: persist. Outcomes vanish, risks are contained, another world is contained, all will be contained. It peers down at the many paths below, expressionless. Another appendage extends from its body, a smooth limb ending on a rounded point. The arm bends, dozens of joints briefly visible as it snaps into an odd angle with calculated precision, pressing itself into the black wall adjacent its form. The stalk sinks into the material effortlessly, which wrinkles and folds inwards like dark fabric. With a click, the needle splits at its tip into a three-pronged claw, which rips a hole into the structure, revealing more darkness behind the black curtains. The entity does not respond. Instead, the extremity moves on its own, disappearing into the hole and telescoping outward an unknown distance. It retracts suddenly, a number of items now enclosed within its grasp. The pale, thin hand deposits its holdings before a large circular feature on the outside of its body, a single piercing eye manifesting within the curved bounds in response. The pupil dilates, inspecting its newfound treasures. A puzzle cube, a wooden cuckoo clock in the shape of a small two-story townhome, and a twisted steel tuning fork which hums lightly on its own. The witness above these items stares for some time, clock ticking loudly all the while. An artificial voice then echoes through the empty chamber, this time not with a command, but a promise. Numena's nearly nascent nascence. Neckties to nooses. Numen to Nehemoth. The clock chimes. It's midnight somewhere. A tiny wooden canary emerges from the timepiece, chirping thrice before receding back into the safety of shelter. A few minutes pass before the clock tolls the same midnight once again. After all, it is only the beginning. Obviously, there's a lot that could be explained here, or attempted to be explained, and at a certain point I'd have to begin explaining whole other things just to explain something here, so I'll keep it relatively simple. The timeline of the article is a little wonky, but at some point Harkness ends up working for the Department of Redundancy Department, an essentially fake department that has cropped up, and he winds up in the big borehole underneath Site-19. 15 years go by, although it's very unclear how much time actually passed, as it doesn't seem like time has much of any meaning down there, until Notional Divisions finds him. Notional Divisions is a department with the purpose of rooting out these fake departments that pop up due to the effect of SCP-8190, which is basically the sapient concept of containment. They couldn't rescue Harkness because that would be going against the rules of the Foundation as outlined in the first edition handbook, which they basically treat as scripture. Harkness ends up getting transferred out by another department from even deeper down the borehole, which is actually the Surrealistics department. He begins working for them and gets a hold of the PA system for Site-19, managing to make some announcements in the real world that allows him to get taken out by Notional Divisions, who he then proceeds to work for. Here he gets a job trying to determine which, if any, departments he finds are suspicious, but it turns out that his boss, Quaid, had set him up, Quaid is a construct created by 8190 to be a model Foundation employee, and the constructs seek to discern their creator. Harkness is going to be replaced to become a construct, but instead he uses a hand-drawn cognitohazard to rush his way over to the single copy of the Foundation's handbook, and manages to burn it. This causes quite a kerfuffle, resulting in him waking up in the desert, and he proceeds to get his old job back in the IT department, now branded the Department of Technical Support. Much of the rest is just more setup for the continuation of the Admonition series, but it definitely does seem like 8190 is not gone for good or anything like that. The article is about admonition and sapient concepts and anomalous departments, of course, but it's also about the general pointlessness and futility of large-scale bureaucracy. Harkness spent 15 years doing absolutely nothing, over and over, for a fake department that practically no one in the entire organization even knew existed, and then was happy to get out so that he could just end up in the IT department again. He was happy because, despite it being a dead-end job towards the bottom of a massive organization, he was at least helping people in some way, and doing something that had an understandable purpose. He laughs at the end about the poor intern whose only purpose at the Foundation is just to deliver drinks to people from the next door room. At the end of the day, many people just want to feel useful in what they do, and years of soul-crushing ennui in a massive corporation can certainly put a damper on that. Much like Black Box, 8190 is a little tricky to digest without having a full picture of numerous other articles, but at least it seems like Harkness is somewhat happy in the end.